All right, this is Crash Canon. I'm Chris, the host of this podcast, and today I have yet another guest, Dr. Philip BLOSSER. Hope I pronounced that right. Why don't you tell everybody about yourself, and then we'll roll right into some of the questions I have.
Well, I was born in China. My parents were Protestant missionaries in China. My mother went there alone in 1947. My father came later and met her. They got married at St. John's Cathedral in Hong Kong. I was born in Chengdu under communism. They tried to stay, and of course, they couldn't, except for a few months under house arrest. They moved to Japan, where I grew up. My first 20 years were in Japan. So my first language really was Japanese. I spoke English in the home, of course. I went to Japanese public school. I graduated from a university in Japan, a Jesuit school. Came to the States. Eventually, in 1993, I became a Catholic, and I taught for 20 years in North Carolina at a Lutheran school, which was very secular. And then I came to Detroit at the invitation of a colleague there who recruited me, and I was so happy to teach at a Catholic institution, and it's been wonderful teaching at Sacred Heart Major Seminary in Detroit, where I teach philosophy. So I get the students their first 2 years, and then they go on for theology before they get ordained. So it's a pleasure to be with you, Chris, and to have this conversation with you tonight.
Well, the pleasure is mine because I can't think of a better person to discuss the subject of speaking in tongues than yourself. So,
yeah, well, that's a subject that's been a long time in coming. It's not one that I was naturally interested in. Of course, I heard about it when I was growing up as a kid, and I heard about speaking in tongues, and it was something kind of weird that no one wanted to really be around. And but eventually, I got drawn into it by some things that happened at the seminary.
Yeah, because right around the area where, the seminary and whatnot, the charismatic movement has had quite a big influence in that area.
It really has. And over the years, the seminary has been recruiting professors who've been part of the Catholic Charismatic Renewal. And they're wonderful people. Many of them are just wonderful people. And yet this issue was kind of in the background. I remember the first time I ever really heard what's generally called speaking in tongues today was at a conference in Steubenville one time. And all of the people during the Mass, they kind of broke out into what they called singing in tongues. And it sounded, sort of pleasant in a certain way, but I never thought that it made quite much sense to call it tongues, because it wasn't a language, at least not one that you could understand. So that's where I first heard it. And then at the seminary, there was an issue where students began complaining that they were being sort of strong-armed into going to charismatic conferences by professors who were disposed in that direction. And the rector called a commission to study the issue. And so I thought I had a sabbatical coming up. And so I thought, well, this isn't my expertise, but it'd be interesting to sort of find out what this is all about. So that's how I got interested in speaking in tongues.
Yeah, that's interesting because before I was an adult, the only time I had ever heard of speaking in tongues was when my dad, he doesn't attend any church at all, but he would talk about some of he referred to them as the crazy Protestants who would fall on the floor, kind of seize up and start speaking in crazy languages that he didn't understand. And I was like, oh, okay, well, all right. That doesn't sound very Catholic. And then as an adult, I was first exposed to it in the last 5 years, actually, believe it or not. And that's when I discovered some other various literature, like Kennedy Hall wrote that Charismania book. And he actually referenced some of your work when he would talk about writing that book. So I thought that was interesting. It kind of led me towards what you were writing. And then incidentally, on the periphery, I found out that some of the people I was friends with were your students. So that was kind of cool.
How about that? So where did you first encounter the phenomenon? Was it in a church service, or was it at a rally of some kind, or what?
Actually, it was in like a Eucharistic adoration type thing.
Hmm.
It was not part of the adoration. The adoration was done correctly. There was no issues there at all. Like, but it was more of a discussion on it. And then it's actually somebody from Steubenville had come out to do a talk on it. And then he started talking about like praying in tongues and stuff. I was like, what are you talking about? I was so confused. And then
Hmm.
at the end of it, they had like people praying over each other in tongues. And I was so confused. I had no idea what was going on.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a very common reaction, Um, and so the question naturally arises, when people talk about speaking in tongues in contexts such as those, are those tongues the same as the tongues mentioned in Pentecost in Acts chapter 2 or in 1 Corinthians 14? Are they the same thing? And so that was sort of the topic of our research. My
Right.
co-author Charles Sullivan and I spent maybe the last 5 years sort of researching this issue. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was curious, when is so before we get too deep into this, I wanted to share everybody the book you guys wrote. It's Speaking in Tongues, a critical historical examination. There's a volume 1 and volume 2 already out. But do you guys have a publishing date for volume 3 yet?
Not a date, but the manuscript is at the publisher.
Okay.
Volume 2 you have up on the screen there.
Yep.
And the subtitle of that is Tongues Through Church History. And so that's the volume that shows that what the word tongues has always meant in church history is languages. There's only two meanings that it has. One is the physical tongue, and the other is language, human languages. It doesn't mean anything else. It's never meant anything else, except in a number of really sort of bizarre sects like the Montanists.
Yeah.
And the Montanists were roundly condemned by the Bishop of Caesarea, Eusebius. He said, okay, what you're doing has no connection with anything in church history. And he claimed that he was pretty harsh. He claimed that it was diabolical. You've been reading it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
This is the one right here. History of the Church by Eusebius of Caesarea, if I pronounced that right.
Yeah, it's such an interesting book, isn't it? It's
I loved it. In the translation I had, it was by an Anglican. I apologize, everybody. It was by an Anglican, but it was a good translation.
Oh yeah.
I had to avoid all the footnotes because it was like always comments about the Roman Catholic Church and stuff. I was like, all right, no footnotes, just ignore the footnotes.
But it's so interesting because he traces back, the whole pedigree of the church, to Peter and the apostles, and the whole succession of the bishops. It's just fascinating, really interesting.
Yeah, and he talks about him and Saint Irenaeus both. I hope I pronounced his name right, but they both talk about the Montanists,
right,
and their kind of crazy utterances, because it's like they're prophesying in languages ununderstood, misunderstood, whatever you want to pronounce that, but
completely unintelligible. It was. I mean, basically, he called them just diabolical babblings.
Yeah,
and
he does.
There's some people that want to try to rehabilitate the Montanists and say they were not so bad and so forth. However, if you really get into what they did, they're pretty far out there, pretty crazy. In fact, Tertullian, who is never called Saint Tertullian, but he wrote a lot of good things in the early part of his career when he was a Catholic. He defected to the Montanists, and eventually he even left the Montanists and started his own sort of thing, which was totally anti-Catholic. And so, some of this stuff leads in the wrong direction, to put it mildly.
I do find it interesting that sometimes the pursuit of knowledge can lead people astray. Like, I feel like with Tertullian, the pursuit of deeper knowledge led him to a place that became not Catholic.
Yeah.
So sometimes you have to really kind of be careful about how you go through these things. But that's not to say anything about what you wrote. I really appreciated everything in your book. That was not a commentary on the book at all.
Sure. Thank you.
The book that you and Charles Sullivan wrote was fascinating for me, because these are the types of things I like to. My wife would call me a bit obsessive, but I really enjoy diving extremely deep into things.
but you have your children and your wife to ground you, which is so important, you know.
Yes, that
But
is
yeah,
true.
I think there is a certain Gnostic temptation, you know, with people that have this kind of quest for knowledge sometimes, and they try to go their own way, independent of the church, and it leads to a kind of Gnosticism.
Yeah,
And
Gnosticism is super prevalent today, just nobody recognizes it.
exactly, and it's so dangerous. It takes the truth and inverts it, just in really diabolical, twisted ways. But yeah, my co-author Charles Sullivan is interesting because he started out as a Pentecostal. He was in Pentecostal circles for over 30 years, and you know, he set out initially to try to find a basis among the church fathers in their writings for what the Pentecostals were practicing, namely this phenomenon they call speaking in tongues, but is unintelligible. And he got so frustrated because he couldn't find any antecedent for that. There were no examples of that in church history, in the mainstream of church Orthodox church history. And when I had my sabbatical, I found him online, and so we agreed to collaborate because he had a lot of he knows languages very well. He knows Syriac and Aramaic and Hebrew and of course Latin and Greek. And I studied Latin and Greek a little bit, so I went to a Protestant seminary called Westminster, and I know Japanese too, although that doesn't really help here. but but it's been
Just real
really
quick, how
yeah.
similar is Japanese to like Chinese or Korean or any of the other Asian
Yeah.
languages?
Chinese is kind of like the Latin of the Orient, you know,
Okay.
and so there are elements of Chinese that get incorporated into a lot of other languages. Into Korean, it's not so obvious in Korean because they don't use the Chinese characters exactly the way the Chinese do. The
Okay.
Japanese incorporate them, but over the years, some of them have changed. For example, on the mainland of China, they simplified a lot of the characters, and in Japan, they've limited the number of characters for like for a newspaper. A newspaper is not permitted to publish more to use more characters than I think. Oh, I forget. It's something like 1,500, or was it 5,000? I think it's 1,500. So you know you have to know a lot of characters, and then if you know the characters, they consist of different elements called radicals. And so if you include all of those different radicals, it's just a headache to look up a word, you know, with the dictionary. It's just crazy. But Japanese, for example, uses Chinese characters which they pronounce differently. For example, to count to 10 in Chinese, it's I sansu ulu chi ba jusu. And the Chinese way of counting in Japanese is ichi ni san chi go roku shichi hachi kuju. But there's also a Japanese way of counting, which is hitotsu, futatsu, mitsu, yotsu, and so forth. And they use also two other scripts, hiragana and katakana. So the three different scripts. Speaking Japanese is a piece of pie. It's easy, but writing or reading it is a bear. It's just so hard. Oh,
Did you ever become fluent, like completely fluent in Japanese then? I'm assuming yes, right?
in speaking and listening, yeah, but
Okay.
not in reading and writing. I can't. And I'm
Okay.
beginning to my American accent is beginning to show a little bit, I'm told, when I speak Japanese. Although at one time I could have spoken on the phone and people wouldn't know that I was a Caucasian, you know.
It is funny how that works. It's like it's totally dependent on the region you grow up in.
It's true. It's true. Yeah.
And
But
it
I
also
love,
depends on what age you are when you're growing up in that region too.
oh,
They say
totally,
people who
totally.
transplant to California and never become, like if you're in your 20s, you'll never have a California accent. You might get a American accent over
Yeah.
like the course of like your entire life, but
Right.
for those like 10 years they're in university studying for a doctorate, they probably will still sound like whatever country they came from.
Right. Right. It's so true. It's so true. Yeah. It helps to be young, and you just pick it up like a sponge, you know? It's
Yeah, that's
wonderful.
why I'm so glad that the school my kids are at, they're learning Latin, which is super cool.
Do they go to one of the Chesterton academies or something?
No, there's three main Catholic schools, actually four main Catholic schools in the down like the close to Toledo
Downriver?
area. Yeah,
Okay.
it's south of, it's because I guess technically downriver because like we're part of
Okay.
that that dispensation to eat muskrat and all that for the Lent season. But it's more downriver than like what most people consider downriver, because we're like right close to Toledo.
Okay, so it's
But
not
anyways,
Cabrini
it's like,
or someplace. It's way down by Toledo.
no.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, pretty
Well, that's
close
good.
to Toledo. But
That's
yeah,
good.
Latin is, I love the Latin language. I probably will never have a mastery of it, but I'd love to be able to read it. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's a beautiful language, especially for chant, but even just how it sounds, it's just beautiful. And I talked to a linguist who knew, I don't know, about 6 or 7 different languages, and he said the most irrational language in the world is Chinese, and the most rational language and the most beautiful language is Latin. Now the Greek speakers would quarrel with that, because Greek is beautiful too, but Latin has a certain beauty that's just matchless. It's beautiful.
Latin always, like, it seems like no matter how you write, as long as you're using like the more liturgical Latin, it always sounds nice when you sing it. No matter what order, not no matter what order, but no matter what psalm you're singing, or it really doesn't seem to matter. It just sounds nice.
It does. Yeah, I've talked to people who distinguish between the classical pronunciation, which is a little harder, that like the C's are hard like K's, they sound like K's, and then the ecclesiastical Latin, which is softer, and they often distinguish them in terms of the classical German pronunciation and the ecclesiastical Italian pronunciation, which is interesting. Yeah.
Well, it makes sense though, because like the ecclesiastical Latin is what eventually leads to the Italian language, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So it would make sense that the Latin that the church spoke would sound more like the area that the church was in.
Yeah, I agree, totally. And it's interesting how the language spread. For example, Romanian is a Latin language, and so if you look at Romanian, there's a lot of influence of Latin in it, and it even sounds almost not quite like Italian, but similar. And the language spoken in Spain in a time of St. Paul was called Vulgar Latin. So it started out as a kind of a corrupt Latin, and it became Spanish. So
that's how we end up with evolution. The Vulgate, right? Because the Vulgate is the language of the people, the vulgar language.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right. So I did interrupt you in the middle of your story about, I think, converting to the Catholic Church. So you were in China and then Japan, and then at what point it was after you came to the United States, right? Because you were at Lutheran University.
Yeah, I wasn't a Lutheran ever, although I had good relations with Lutherans. When I was a missionary kid, there was 2 years, when my parents wanted to send me to a boarding school, which was a school that was run by basically Christian Americans, Protestants, but there were no boarding facilities. So I boarded with a Lutheran family, a Missouri Synod Lutheran family, and they were just wonderful people.
Missouri Synod is probably the most similar to Catholicism of all the Lutheran versions.
Absolutely, yeah. I learned to enjoy the music of Johann Sebastian Bach. I just love this family, and then later, when I was teaching in North Carolina, I was teaching at Lenoir-Rhyne University, and it's a Lutheran.
I think your mic cut out.
Oh, really? Can you hear me now or not? No?
Is it me? Maybe it's me.
Let me try this. Can you hear me now? Now? My mic still cut out?
I think your mic cut out.
Let me see. It cut out. Huh.
Mine's on the right one.
Let's see what we can do.
Okay. All right. My mic's good. Did you check yours? Check your settings real quick.
I'm just checking the audio right now. Okay. It looks like it's working here. It says the live stream cam says it's working, but you can't hear.
Is it going through your headphones? Because if so, you might have.
Yeah, I can hear myself speaking, but let me try something. Okay, that doesn't work. Does this work? Or this? Does this work?
Yeah, I've completely lost you. as far as
Or
sound
this? What
goes.
about, wow. Let me try something else. This, does that work?
Weird. Let me see if
Does it
my
work?
make sure it's not. Nope, because it doesn't show your mic actually making sound.
What does this work?
Okay, my headphones are correct. My mic's correct.
This, because on my screen it shows the mic.
Do you want to try logging out and logging back in to the program? See if that's what did it.
I could do that. I could try that. Yeah. Okay. So let's see.
Let me try.
Okay, I just got the link. Okay. Okay. Let's see. It says the mic is working. Enter the studio. Is that? How's that?
All right, I'm going to remove the extra one. There we go. Okay, I can hear you again. I think you're logged in twice though, so you might want to exit out the extra tab.
Okay. What do I have to do?
Here, let me try. Hold on. I think I can just kick the extra one out. Hold on. Aha. I think we're good.
We're good now?
I think we're good.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
You can hear. Okay.
Yep. I don't know what happened there. That was bizarre.
I don't either.
Actually, even weirder, my headphones, when you lost your mic, I lost my headphones at the same time. So I thought initially it was me. Talk about having to speak a different language. I don't think we could have heard each other or spoken. We were totally in the dark.
Yeah, we were babbling in tongues.
Anyway, so you were living with the Missouri Synod Lutherans. And you were listening to like Bach and various other things.
Right. And later I went to, it's a long history. I mean, I spent a couple of years in Switzerland, one year there as a student. And then I went to seminary, a Presbyterian seminary in Westminster in Philadelphia. And then finished my graduate school in Pennsylvania, and then went down to North Carolina for 20 years, where I taught philosophy at this Lutheran school. Although the Lutheran connection of the school is very tenuous, it began to just sort of drift away from that. And today it's really quite far from its original moorings in the Lutheran tradition. But then from there, it was while I was there that I became a Catholic. And I think part of it was just the realization that there were all these different Protestant sects, different denominations, and sort of curiosity about where this all came from, right? And I've always been interested in traditions. And, even before this time, when I was in Japan, I went to a Catholic university, a Jesuit university in Tokyo. But it never occurred to me to become a Catholic. And it was while I was in North Carolina that it all started with a footnote in a book. I was teaching a course on the history and philosophy of law. And it was a book by Harold Berman called Law and Revolution, the Development of the Western Legal Tradition. And there was a footnote in the chapter on canon law about the papacy. And the footnote basically said that the Pope cannot just do anything he wants, but he's tied to an infallible tradition that he's incapable of changing. And I thought, what? I thought the Pope could do anything. And so this raised a lot of questions. And of course, curiosity leads to a lot of interesting reading. And basically, to cut to the chase, I went through the 3 phases of conversion that Chesterton describes. The first is curiosity. The second is utter terror. Like, oh my gosh, what if this is true? What am I going to do? Lose all my friends, right? And then the last stage is, of course, joy, the joy of embracing what you find to be true. And so it was there in North Carolina that I was received into the church on Holy Wednesday of 1993, right?
Okay.
So it's been quite a while now, right? But it's been a joy to be a Catholic, just an absolute joy. I wouldn't trade it for anything. With all the troubles people talk about, I wouldn't trade it for anything. It's just wonderful. There are such incredible resources in the Catholic tradition, as you
Oh
know,
yeah,
as a reader. It's just phenomenal.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do feel like a lot of the Protestants I've talked to, like prior to the last like 5 years, most of them seem very sure of like the last 500 years, but not so much past that.
Right.
A
I
lot of
know.
them struggle with going back further than that and really staying in their Protestant sect
Oh,
after that.
yeah. And Cardinal Newman was very important to me in my journey. To go deep into history is to cease to be Protestant. And his whole essay on the development of Christian doctrine, all of that stuff, his apologia, his writings are just really, really helpful.
He's on my list. I haven't read him yet, but he's on
Okay.
my list.
He's good. Of course, he doesn't beat St. Thomas Aquinas, but he's still really good.
That is a I think that'll be my 2026 goal, will be to read the entire Sumo.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Oh, my gosh. It was such a feast. You know who used to read, maybe you know this, but who used to read the Summa before she would go to bed, even as a young girl, was Flannery O'Connor.
Oh, really?
You know
I
the
did not know
story?
that. No, I
Oh,
don't.
it's hilarious. Peter Crave talks about it. He says that when she was a little girl, she would be reading St. Thomas Aquinas. Her mother would come in and say, "Turn out the light. It's time to sleep." And she, with her finger uplifted, to say, "Sed contra," on the contrary, the light being eternal cannot be extinguished. Shut your eyes, or something smart ass like that, And she says, Flannery O'Connor says that, for the life of me, I cannot help loving St. Thomas Aquinas. And she acquired the habitus, the habit of reading Thomas and understanding him before going to bed. And so if she could do that, I encourage my seminarians to say, well, look, you can do this too. You can learn to read him. It's a different style. It's very clunky and cumbersome at first, but after you get the hang of it, you're going to love it.
Oh yeah, I love the struggle, so for me it'll be fun.
Yeah, yeah. I know you do. Being the reader that you are, I'm so impressed that you're reading all these church fathers. That's just so good.
Yeah, it's just been my thing. In fact, I've been trying to, and I don't know if I'll ever find one, a complete set of the Ante-Nicene Fathers. That's what I want to read, but we'll see if we ever get there.
There's an edition that's put out by the Presbyterians, the Scottish Enlightenment Presbyterians, and the translations are pretty good. The notes are horrible because they're very anti-Catholic, but it's available for pretty cheap. It's published by, I don't know who publishes it now. It used to be Erdman's, I think, but it's a nice set. But then there's a Catholic edition that's a little more detailed, but it costs a lot more.
And it's probably from like the 50s or something, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But if you can find it used, it's worth its weight in gold.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I don't doubt that one bit. There is a company that's published a few of the editions, not all of them. It's
right.
What is the company? It's the same one that did this St. Irenaeus Ex Fontibus company. It's actually out of Jackson, Michigan.
Interesting.
They reprint like old prints, and I'm hoping eventually they'll have the whole set. We'll see.
Yeah, it's interesting who publishes some of these things. For example, in our book on the Speaking in Tongues issue, especially in volume 3 and 4, we're getting into,
Wait, 4 volumes now?
Oh yeah, the problem is that volume 3 turned out to be too big for the publisher. They said, you can't do this in 1 volume, it has to be 2. So we had to split it into 2. And I hate that we had to do that, because people, this is kind of a niche product, it's not something that everyone's interested in. And here people have to buy 4 volumes. I mean, that's crazy, right? And it's not as if we're making any money off of this. Maybe we made $100 so far, in royalties. But academic publishing is not a moneymaker, but it's unfortunate. So volume 3 contains basically the whole background of Corinth, the sociolinguistic background of Corinth. It goes into some of the patristics that deal with the Corinthian tongues, like Ambrosiaster and Cyril of Alexandria and Epiphanius and so forth. But then it also gets into some alternative interpretations like prayer. What sort of tongues are used in prayer. Charismatics like to say that speaking in tongues is a personal language of prayer and praise. And so we get into that issue and sort of deal with that. But then volume 4 actually has a commentary on 1 Corinthians 14, a pretty long commentary. And it's a big thing, but then there are also a number of essays that address the whole issue of speaking in tongues in various sort of tangential issues. So it's a very interesting volume, but it's 2 volumes now, 3 and 4. So it's all at the publishers, waiting for them to get it, the proof sent out to us.
Yeah, you kind of get the feeling like Tolkien, where he wanted to publish his entire Lord of the Rings in 1 volume, and publisher said, "Heck no,
no." Yeah,
are you
exactly.
Crazy?
I know. It's true. Yeah, Tolkien, the Shakespeare of our 20th century. Amazing stuff.
I mean, he was a genius. I mean, philology. How many people study that?
Oh my gosh.
I mean, that's. I mean, I guess technically you are, right? Technically.
Yeah. I mean, Tolkien, what did you start out in philology, I think, or something?
Yeah, philology. Yeah.
Philology, classics and philology or something. And I forget what he ended up in, but he invented his own languages, right?
I know.
Just incredible.
The amount of intellect it would take to do that.
He studied Anglo-Saxon, the runes and everything. It's incredible. It's incredible.
He basically wrote his own Bible for Lord of the Rings with the Silmarillion. I mean, it's. I mean, who does that? But he did. It was
plus the poetry. The poetry he produced. Incredible.
Not only did he invent his own language, but he created Elvish tunes for it.
Yeah, tunes, and then his Silmarillion is just like, oh my gosh, it's mind blowing what he does. It's sort of like the work of Hesiod. Hesiod, the ancient Greek, who has this book on the gods and the history of the gods. It's just amazing,
Absolutely, yeah. I
mean,
you don't like. It's sad you don't really see that type of depth in modern books or really media in general.
I know. One thing we did when our kids were growing up was we just never had TV, back when TV was a thing. And we didn't really have internet. And so they really got into reading, all except for one. There was a period where some neighbors took pity on us because they knew that one of our sons liked basketball. And so they brought over an old black and white TV for them to watch. And, he just became a non-reader. He just watched TV. But he's doing very well otherwise. But all the others are readers. And the youngest is a daughter who's now in Rome. And she studied Italian for the last 2 years. And she knows Latin and Greek. The only language she didn't pick up, which she regrets now, is Japanese. I tried speaking Japanese to her when she was little, but she just resisted. And now she kicks herself for that.
Yeah, that's definitely a language that I it's hard to pick up as you get older, I feel like.
Oh, yeah. It is. I tried looking at the Duolingo, but it would be hard for somebody to learn Japanese just through Duolingo or something. Very, very difficult.
Yeah, Duolingo is good for languages, I think, that are similar to your own, but not so great for languages that are kind of from a different family tree.
Like Arabic is just really impossible the way they try to introduce it. It just doesn't work.
I believe that.
Yeah.
So I think we've gotten through several of the questions I had kind of on our own. with this
Okay.
conversation. But here is a question that I think we should talk about. So prior to the Catholic charismatic movement, had there been any such instances in your research showing a gift of the Holy Spirit initially being found outside the church?
Okay. There are
Because
a number
we
of
know that
things.
the charismatic movement stems from the Pentecostal movement with Charles Parham and all that.
Yeah. So there are a number of things that need to be defined here. One is charism, right? What is a charism? It's a gift of the Holy Spirit and so forth. A charism has a whole range of meanings. It can mean anything from just a human natural skill that you have, like you have a skill of reading and
Kind of like
comprehending things, right?
the talents in the Bible. They've got all kinds of
Yeah.
different aspects to it.
And I like to think my daughter has a gift of languages, right? She just takes to languages like a duck to water. She knows more Latin than I know, and more Greek than I know now. And Italian, I've never studied Italian. I know some tourist Italian, but that's about it. And so you could say she has a charism, but it's nothing supernatural. It's a natural disposition. So a lot of things. One problem with 1 Corinthians 12 and 14 is that when the charismatics approach it, they approach it as referring to sort of a how-to chapter in dealing with supernatural gifts. But I don't think that's Paul's intention at all. His intention
I don't get
is
that
rather,
feeling reading it either.
Yeah, it's very different. And we go into that in our commentary a great deal. But so that's one thing that needs to be defined is charism and gift. So when we talk about gifts of the Holy Spirit, what do we mean, right? A natural gift can be like I have the gift, I think, of teaching, I like to tell myself. And that's something natural. It's something I've worked at, but it's something that the Holy Spirit can take and then elevate maybe to a supernatural level in some way, to communicate God's grace in some way to students. So charisms need to be sort of demythologized in a way, the whole notion of charisms. There are supernatural happenings, people raised from the dead and so forth. Things like that have happened in church history. And yet, I'd be very reluctant often to attribute to a person like an abiding gift to do something like that. Like even St. Francis Xavier, if you've read the volume that has a chapter on Xavier, there were times when he had to study Japanese, and it was very hard.
I thought that, for the record, the St. Francis Xavier section kind of blew my mind with the idea that a charism of a supernatural origin could come and go. That had never crossed my mind. I was like, because I assume when the apostles got the gift of tongues, they just had it for the rest of their lives, essentially.
Right.
That was my thought process. But hearing you discuss Francis Xavier having it at times when he needed it, but not at times when he didn't need it,
right,
it makes a lot of sense from the perspective of, even if you think about it the way Paul describes it, like having the gift of tongues is for non-believers.
Right.
So being able to speak a language, not your natural language, but a new language, especially from a supernatural origin, it makes more sense. You would need that for evangelizing new areas.
Right. Exactly.
So that section kind of blew my mind. I was like, whoa, that's pretty awesome, actually, to think about it that way.
And a lot of the early patristics talk about the duration of a gift, and they're almost not entirely, but they're almost unanimous in saying that typically what happens is it comes and goes, right? Mm-hmm. It's not something that's an abiding gift that somebody has forever. Now, sometimes that seems to have happened, but it's very rare. And one thing that you raised in your preliminary questions we haven't talked about yet, but it's related, I think, is the notion that tongues is something easily accessible and that it's very common today, right?
It seems like that would be the premise of the charismatic movement.
Yeah, and in fact, it's sort of like the doorway of, I won't call it a drug, but it's sort of like the doorway to a lot of these other charisms that they like to talk about. The charism of healing, for example. You can go to Encounter Ministries and pay a tuition of $1,000 or something for a semester, I think it is, and sort of learn how to be open to acquiring the gift of healing and so forth, or the gift of speaking in tongues. But this is just kind of weird because if you read the fathers, and we've talked about this earlier in our correspondence and conversation before we got into this podcast, but a lot of the fathers, like St. Augustine's, would insist that once the church reached the level where it spoke what he calls all the languages of the world. In other words, there were Catholics who spoke Syriac and Greek and Latin and all these different languages, Arabic and so forth. There was no longer a need for tongues in the sense of languages to evangelize those who didn't have the gospel, right?
Absolutely,
today,
yeah. Augustine absolutely says that. Like that's how he describes the gift of tongues in his time. That's 1600 years ago.
Yeah. And also Federico Suarez, who's just as important as St. Thomas Aquinas on many issues. He's not as well known, but he had an encyclopedic mind, and he just appropriated everything that went before him. And his writings on these issues are also very, very good and very similar to St. Thomas Aquinas. But he's much more recent. He's a neo-scholastic, he's much more recent. So very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, I Augustine's interesting in a bunch of different ways. Like, for example, he talks about how the liturgical language should be in the vernacular, but they kind of already had that because you have the interpreter, which you describe later in volume 2, especially in the areas where they don't know Greek, but the Greek is the language of the liturgy in the area. So like for the Syriacs, they would have an interpreter. And
right.
I think that's makes more sense to have somebody there to interpret rather than to change the language is being delivered in. And Augustine, I think, supports that with his conversation.
Yeah, that's
and that would be a gift of tongues, right?
Yeah, it's so important. There's some professors that retire at the seminary, and typically their books are put in a room and you're allowed to go in and take what you want. And so I picked out one of the books one day. It was in Greek, and it was about the early liturgies in Greek. And it was so interesting because we found in reading this book that that there was a minor order, just like there's an order of the exorcist, and all these minor orders that they used to have. One of the minor orders was that of an interpreter.
Interesting.
In a Syrian church. And there are prayers in Greek, for the interpreters who've died and gone before us and so forth. I mean, it's fascinating stuff. And they would describe just what you did right now, which is, where the language was in Syriac, Syrian, or another name for it would be not Hebrew, but Aramaic, right? Aramaic and Chaldean and Syriac are basically all the same language as far as how it sounds, but it's written with a different script. But where the language was one of those, the liturgy would still be in Greek. And there was a woman, I referred to this woman a number of times, but in one of the later volumes that's coming out, we go into much more detail, but her name was Egeria. She's called a number of different things. Her name's spelled differently, but she was like a 4th century woman from Western Europe, from either Spain or southern France, who made a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. And she kept detailed records of the masses that she went to. And it's amazing because already then, the propers, for the different seasons, so forth, are very much similar to what the Roman Church used, up until recently, or and so forth, still uses in certain places.
Makes sense, yeah.
And what's really interesting is she describes in detail how the translator or the interpreter would stand right next to the priest and repeat everything he's saying in the vernacular. Just fascinating.
Yeah, the only instances I've seen in the modern times of that type of thing is in the masses where you have deaf people. You have like an American Sign Language interpreter getting up on the altar, and usually it's either a deacon or another priest. But I've seen it a couple times. It's interesting. The weird one though was they had the priest doing sign language, and the
Oh,
interpreter was speaking, and I was like, hold on, I think you probably have to do the liturgy in actual spoken language.
yeah,
I
yeah,
could
yeah.
be wrong, but I don't know how you could do sign language and consecrate a host.
Yeah, that'd be hard. That'd be hard. Yeah, I don't see either. That
So
would be
that
weird.
one's a little questionable for me, but I've seen other
Yeah.
times where like you have just an interpreter for sign language,
Now,
and I think
growing up,
that's important, right?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Now, in a non-liturgical context, growing up as a Protestant missionary kid in Japan, I many times I saw missionaries, even when Billy Graham would come over and give a crusade, as he called his rallies. There would always be an interpreter standing by him, and he would say something in English, and then it'd be repeated in Japanese. So this was a common thing that we saw, and it was just simply something like that was going on in the Catholic churches in the East and Greek, and then later on in Latin in the West. And one thing too, as you said, the Vulgate was written in what was called the vulgar language, which is a popular language of the people. But there's something important that a number of liturgists have pointed out, and that is that even the popular language, once it came into liturgical use, became very formalized, included a lot of Hebraisms, and was a very elevated language. Where I saw this more recently was at a Novus Ordo Mass in Nagasaki in southern Japan. And Nagasaki is in the southern island of Kyushu in Japan, where all the Catholics, almost all of them, are concentrated. In most of the rest of Japan, there are not many Catholics.
Yeah.
But in Nagasaki, there are a lot. And we went to a mass there, and it was packed. And all the women were wearing veils, right? But it was Novus Ordo. However, the language of the mass was extremely elevated. It was something that you would not use in ordinary Japanese. The language is very formal and beautiful. There have been even non-Christian Japanese that have commented on the type of language it is. It's so beautiful to hear, and so there's almost always been this kind of distinction, whether it's Arabic, for the Muslims, or whether it's Hebrew for the Jews, or Greek for the Christians, or whatever it might be. There's always this kind of language that's set apart.
And kind of like the regal English, like the more Shakespearean style.
Exactly, right? Exactly. Yeah.
These and thous, and the language we all like to use in our prayers.
Oh yeah, and Anglicans are so good at sort of preserving that. The Anglican, I think the ISO, the International Commission on English and Liturgy, kind of botched it. When they translated a lot of things. But the Anglicans do a really good job in their chanting, for example, their Vesper services in their churches over in England.
Well, you can always stick with the ordinariate too.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. One collect that I like to use is from the Anglican tradition, but it's it's Gregorian. It comes from the Catholics, but it's a collect for purity that the Anglicans still, even the ordinariate, uses for the opening of the Mass. And it's Almighty God, unto whom all hearts are open, all desires known, and from whom no secrets are hid. Cleanse the hearts by the inspiration of thy Holy Spirit, that we may perfectly love thee and worthily magnify thy holy name through Christ our Lord. I mean, what's more beautiful than that? It's just gorgeous.
I want to say, I think that's in here, actually. I think it's in that Divine Worship Daily Office.
Oh, really? Good.
I think it is.
Yeah, the collect for purity.
Yeah, I think that is in there. I think I saw that one yesterday, the day before, when I was looking through it. Because I like to look through my prayer books cover to cover when I'm like figuring them out.
Me too, absolutely. Yeah.
So here's another question more about your books.
Okay.
So with the initial reaction of Protestants being seemingly cessationist, which we'll define that as people who basically believe that the gifts after the apostolic age ended, right? That would be a cessationist view.
Right.
And later on, some groups wholeheartedly embracing it. What do you think that was all shaped on just being anti-Catholic, or how do we end up with the cessationist Protestants embracing the apostolic gifts as if they're still in use today?
Yeah, there's been a real transformation. I mean, I think a lot of it was anti-Catholic. I don't think it entirely was, because
Well, yeah.
there are some church fathers who talk about the diminishment of various gifts. For example, Saint Chrysostom, John Chrysostom,
Yeah.
talks about the diminishment. He attributes that to the declining morals of his time. But
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
yeah, kind of interesting. Uh, and so he stresses, rather than gifts, he stresses, the importance of purity and the importance of virtue in Christians' lives and so forth. Um, but there's also this anti-Catholicism that surfaces, especially in the 16th century, against all these sort of this proliferation of Catholic claims, like in the Golden Legend, and things like
Yeah.
that.
I like the
Uh,
Golden Legend.
yeah, it's fascinating to read. Um, and but there's also a transformation. The modern renewalist movement sort of underwent three different waves, as one writer out in the West Coast called it. He said the first wave was Pentecostalism, classic Pentecostalism. The second wave was a charismatic movement which spread to other traditions and included also some of the Reformed or Calvinist traditions. And that's where some of the Calvinists ended up being charismatic, right? Which is kind of shocking, because they're from a tradition that kind of rejects the ongoing miracles of tongues and healing and so forth. Now, they accept the possibility of miracles anytime, but
Yeah.
not the ongoing gifts of miracles. Um, and then the third wave is the wave of signs and wonders, which kind of goes beyond all that, where you get like the Toronto blessing, and just where things go kind of
Little haywire.
yeah, sort of. I would say so.
Well, it is interesting because the only real, like, what I would call Catholic tradition, at least from my own studies, of a transfer of any kind of like sacramental or blessing is usually done by the bishop to priests,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
That's
yeah,
the only one I can think of where you have like a laying on of hands, a transference of apostolic orders of some sort. It's the only thing I can think of. Like, but then you get, I forget what they call it, transference or something, where you get the gift of tongues from somebody else who has the gift of
yeah,
tongues. It's kind of
yeah.
odd the way that
Yeah,
that's
it is.
described.
It is kind of odd. I remember being at the founding meeting of the Coming Home Network, on
Mhm.
EWTN, with Marcus Grodi and all that. It was
I've
at
watched a few
Steuben.
of those episodes.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So, it was at Steubenville, and I was there on that occasion, and it was very interesting because Bishop Bruskowitz from Nebraska was in the room. And there were all these people that were becoming Catholics who were there, from Pentecostal backgrounds. And there was one person, I don't remember who it was, but there's somebody in the room who, in a period of sort of sharing and praying together, this person talked about having cancer. And all these people rushed up and laid hands on this person who said that he had cancer. And Bishop Bruskowitz was sort of sitting on the side, and I thought, there's something about this picture which is a little odd for a Catholic, because he seemed like somebody who's sort of awkwardly sort of sitting there not knowing what to do, you know, whereas these Pentecostals right in the thick of it. And so, yeah, I'm right with you there. I think there's something about this whole picture that's a bit odd. And
And maybe you can help enlighten me on this a little bit, but as far as I understand it, the words doing something over somebody else is usually engaged with the idea that they have authority over you, right?
yeah, yeah,
Generally speaking.
that's the issue. Yes.
So if you're praying over, like if you use that language, I'm praying over somebody, I
Right.
should have some authority over that person.
Right. That's true.
So
And so
that's
this,
always bothered me with the way that this
yeah,
described.
it's a problem. And that's why I no longer, initially, when somebody wanted to pray for me who's a Pentecostal or charismatic, I'd say, sure, pray for me. But when they started praying in what they call tongues and wanting to put their hands on me, I said, wait a minute, this is something a priest can do. I don't feel quite comfortable with you doing it. And also, there's some things I read, like Father Ripperger, who's an exorcist for the Archdiocese of Denver. He gave some examples. He has the highest respect for charismatics, for many of them. But he says that, a lot of these people have had to really clean up because they get so messed up into the occult without realizing it. When they have hands laid on them, or they lay hands on somebody who's like oppressed or possessed or something, things can happen that you don't want to happen. Like there's one case of possession which is ongoing, like 10 years, and they still haven't been able to exorcise the demon out of this person. And it started with a person, a charismatic person, laying hands on somebody to try to bring healing to them, right? So the intentions were good, but I think of that verse in Acts where, the demons speak up to the sons of Sceva or something or other and say, okay, Paul we know, and Jesus Christ we know, but who are you?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Who are you to think you have the authority over us? You don't. Right?
Yeah. And the authority was granted by Jesus to the individuals that the demons are mentioning, right?
That's
and
right.
The only way you could have that authority is through apostolic laying on of hands from the bishop
That's
to
right.
a priest, or
That's
from,
right.
And then you have to have permission from a bishop to do it in the first place, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So I have that book by Father Ripperger. I think I pronounced that right.
Ripperger, yeah.
That the deliverance prayers. But in the introduction forward, he basically says, these are the people, if you're like an adult male who's got children, these are like your kids are who you have authority over. You don't have authority over your siblings or your parents, but you can use these prayers because you have authority over your children in your household. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Guess I won't be trying to exorcise demons out of my siblings or anything.
No, no, that's good. He has a number of really interesting books. There's that wonderful deliverance book that you mentioned. He has another book on charisms, right? Very interesting.
Yeah. That's one I've thought about picking up. I just haven't gotten it yet.
It's a translation of something written earlier, but he has a commentary as well. It's very good. Very, very good. So there's a lot that he's written. It's quite helpful. And also his book on, what is it? The Science of Mental Illness or something or other. It's like an 800-page book. It's a huge book. That's mostly St. Thomas Aquinas, but it's really good stuff. It's a good analysis.
He also has a bunch of prayers in the back of the deliverance prayer book, which I hadn't even thought to ever need, but it's about freeing people from the Freemason church. Because it is technically, it is the Masonic, the lodge, the whatever you want to call it. There is a religion to it. So, you could get really messed up in the occult of Freemasonry.
It's true. Yeah.
So we were talking about the idea that language is important, because if you were to, the authority to do these laying on of hands and stuff. So let's just say you were to get somebody who was possessed into the charismatic movement somehow, and that person's laying on hands. I feel like that could be very dangerous.
It could, yeah. There's a lot. I think the strengths of the charismatic movement today are two things. I think one is a sense of the supernatural.
Yeah, they have a good sense of that.
A good sense, and also a sense of the spiritual battle. Like if you read Ralph Martin's book on the crisis in the church, or the church in crisis, I think there's some really good stuff in there. I don't agree with everything he says, but there's some really good stuff in there, and a sense of the spiritual battle. But I think also these strengths can lead to sort of deformations of a certain kind, where everything becomes supernatural and there's nothing natural anymore. That's a danger. And where everything is seen in terms of a spiritual battle, where maybe there's just a disagreement or something that's natural, right? So there are areas, I think, where one has to tread very carefully here. And these things need to be brought to the light and discussed more clearly, I think, by our bishops and priests.
I would say the two outcomes I've seen with even friends of mine that have been inside of the charismatic movement, what I've seen has been a lot of emotions at the beginning, the forefront. There's a lot of emotions, a lot of spirituality, and then they either go one of two ways. They either go full deep into the charismatic movement, and they're like very into it, and they're very spiritual people, and I respect that. It's not me, but I respect. I'm not spiritual in that way anyway. or they go very traditional. I've seen some families go from the charismatic movement to being like straight up TLM attendees. You know, they only want to do the Latin masses, and I'm like, wow, this is an interesting development.
It's true. I mean, yeah. I mean, that cuts very close to home too, because you know there's a designated parish in Ann Arbor called Christ the King, and a lot of people there are now going to St. Thomas the Apostle, you know, for the Latin Mass and so forth. So yeah, I think that can happen, definitely. But yeah, like you, I do respect these people a great deal, and I think there's certain areas where they need to read more carefully sort of where these ideas have come from, and a lot of it comes from outside the Catholic tradition, and that's something they need to be aware of. You know, I think there's a danger of attributing to the charismatic tradition a lot of things that are really proper to the Catholic tradition. For example, in some of these books about the origins of the charismatic movement, the Catholic charismatic movement, they list the things that they take pride in as a product of being baptized in the Holy Spirit. And they list a bunch of things, and they're things that any Catholic should embrace, right? A closer desire for prayer, a deeper love of Scripture, a love of God. All these things are things that St. Augustine would applaud. But there's usually one thing in there that's different, right? And the one thing that is usually something like an exhibition of a manifestation of the gifts of the Holy Spirit, by which they mean usually speaking in tongues in their sense, right? Or something of that sort, which is totally alien to the whole tradition of the patristic fathers and so forth.
That was probably where I fell off the rails with this presentation that we had. So we had this presentation done by somebody else. I'm not going to name them because I don't want to like,
sure,
you know, there's no reason to, but the whole presentation was basically like, it was a good trip through like what we believe, why we believe it. It was very like, the whole thing was good. And then at the very end, the last like 30-minute segment, now we're all going to speak in tongues. And I was like, what? wait a second. You lost me there. And then they're like, well, we got these people are trained to do it and they're going to pray over you. I was like, I think I'm going to step aside. I think I'm okay. Like I'm not exactly comfortable with people I don't know touching me first off,
right,
you know,
right,
like that's not
right,
my thing.
Right.
But on top of that, it was like, wait, what? And so like a friend of mine was like, well, why don't you try it? I was like, I think I'm okay. I don't. And he has since actually gone further into tradition than even I have at this point. And I'm like, very much respect him. Good friend of mine. But he was very deep into it for quite a while. And he had set up this whole program, and it was a good, like I said, it was good all the way up to that last half hour. And I was like, I don't know about this.
Yeah. You know, one of my good friends at the seminary was Monsignor Daniel Trapp. He was a great man. He's deceased now. He went to God. And he was just a good friend, but he was part of the charismatic movement. And he told me some things that were most amusing. He said, and he has a great sense of humor about this whole thing, right? He's one of the people that doesn't get all bent out of shape about things, you know, when there's disagreements. He's very charitable. He's very humorous. And he said, you know, there were times in the charismatic movement when he tried to teach people how to speak in tongues, and we would say, repeat after me. I bought a Toyota. I should have bought a Honda. I bought a Toyota. Should have bought a Honda. Bought a Toyota. Pretty soon, he'll be speaking in tongues. Right? Okay. If you have to prime the pump like that to learn how to speak in tongues, how can this be a gift of the Holy Spirit? Right?
Yeah.
But he would laugh about that, right? He was just a wonderful colleague and friend. You know, he's just a great guy. But yeah, and that's a serious question as well. You know, can the gift of tongues be taught? Right? Is it a skill that you can learn?
And if it is, then is it supernatural?
Exactly. Yeah.
Now,
so there's some big questions here.
I did see this is coming back to me because I remember seeing this years ago, or maybe last year, 2 years, whatever it was. There was a post. I think it was a post of yours that was public about the idea that it could be the gift of jubilation. Is that something you've explored any more deeply?
In volume 3, chapter 4 is devoted to that. Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. So
that was an interesting premise.
Yeah, we discuss Eddie Ensley, Deacon Ensley, wrote a book called Sounds of Wonder. And he claims that, and Mary Healy picks up on this too, but Ensley claims that speaking in tongues went by another name during the Middle Ages, and even earlier than that in some of the church fathers, and it was called jubilation. The problem is there's no precedent for that. There's no precedent at all for that, right? It's I think it's maybe a good idea to call what charismatics do now when they talk about speaking in tongues, to call that not tongues, but to call it jubilation. I think that makes sense. But to say that that's another way of speaking in tongues is just there's no basis for that in church history, right?
It seems like the first instance of speaking in tongues used that way came in the 1800s, from what I can tell.
Yeah. In the late 1800s, I actually have the name of the guy here who first did that. His name was Christoph Gottfried Bardili. Okay, so it's an Italian name, although he was a German Enlightenment philosopher. And he's the first to suggest that the Corinthian tongues were unintelligible utterances, right? Kind of interesting. Yeah. And then in the early 1800s, around the 1830s, this just took off, right? And they coined the word glossolalia and so forth. That was coined. That's not a biblical word. It's a word that's simply cobbled together by these German scholars, right?
Yeah.
These higher critics.
Now, did xenolalia already exist? Was that already a defined term?
Not until later, no.
Okay.
Xenolalia. There may have been some people in psychology that maybe used that word, but not in the circles that were theological, right? Until later. And Pentecostals only began using the word glossolalia. This would be in maybe 1930s or so, something like that. This is much later, after the crisis of missionary tongues. When they discovered they couldn't speak in languages. It's interesting that all the first Pentecostals, when they talked about speaking in tongues, they understood tongues to be human languages, and so they're correct about that.
Mm-hmm.
But then they redefined tongues as a spiritual language once they discovered that they couldn't speak miraculously in foreign languages on the mission field, right? In China and in India.
Language is probably one of the most interesting and wide range research things you could do, because there's just so much.
There is.
Like, for example, I've spent probably the better part of a few years studying different translations of the Bible into English, especially. And I've come to the conclusion, and I don't know if you're in the same place I am on this one, because I'm a little bit of a Vulgate purist. If it didn't come from the Vulgate to English, I'm not exactly interested in that translation anymore.
So you must like Monsignor Ronald Knox's translation.
I do.
Right? It's excellent. It's beautiful.
It is really great.
It is.
I also am hunting a complete set of the Confraternity of Christian Doctrine, which was printed in 4 volumes, and then the New Testament over the course of like 1941 to 1969.
Yeah, they were hoping to use that as the liturgical, translation, but that kind of fell by the way then later, didn't it? Unfortunately. Yeah.
It has a unique Genesis too, which is interesting.
Yeah.
That they actually threw that out when they made the New American Bible. They're like, no, this Genesis translation, not for us. Basically how it came out.
And the New American Translation has some really unfortunate, just like in Isaiah, I forget where exactly, but when it talks about the Prince of Peace, Almighty, it's something that Handel picks up in his Messiah and uses, from the King James. But in the New American translation, it's God hero. It just it falls like a big clunk. It just doesn't sound right. Yeah.
If it makes you feel better, there was actually painted on the walls of the church that at the school my kids attend, the King James version of a verse. It was like instead of goodwill, it was peace towards men of goodwill, but instead it was goodwill towards men or something. It was whatever the opposite way, that the only way you would get that translation is if you were painting the King James version up.
Right.
And I was like, oh, really? Like, what are we thinking here? Putting Protestant verses on a Catholic church.
I know.
Oh, there is a
Oh,
King James for Catholics. Did you know that?
no, really?
Yeah, it's
Huh?
produced by the group that does liturgical stuff for Our Lady of Walsingham, I think.
Really?
I wanna say that's the group. But I found it. It's 2 volumes on Amazon. They're paperbacks and they're huge.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, I've been to Walsingham. It's a wonderful pilgrimage, but I didn't know about that.
I've
Yeah,
thought about picking it up, but my wife would probably get a little angry with the amount of
yeah,
Bibles I have at this point.
yeah. That's very interesting. Very interesting. I know there's a new King James Bible, sort of taking out the these and thous, and so forth.
Yeah.
And Jimmy Aiken likes to use that apparently. There's a certain crisp quality to it that's maybe nice, but the Dewey Reams is all right. It's quite nice.
That's the one I
But
read cover to cover.
really,
Yep.
yeah, yeah.
It's
I read.
tough.
Yeah, yeah. It is. It's good stuff though. Good stuff. When it's translated before the King James came around, so it's
Yeah, about 2 years they beat him by, I want to say.
yeah, it's really quite impressive. Yeah.
The verse that I probably studied the most actually it was a motivation from a conversation with my father-in-law is Genesis 3:15.
Oh,
The
really?
she shall
Huh.
crush thy head versus he shall crush thy head.
Oh, yeah.
I've probably spent enough deep dives into that one verse where I could write about 100-page book on it.
Wow. You should do that.
I want to. It's probably if I was going to write some kind of apologetics or theology based book, it'd probably
Yeah.
be that.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Philo supports she, believe it or not.
Really? Good.
Yeah, yeah.
Philo.
Philo does,
Interesting.
yeah. Which is contemporary with when this stuff's getting written down.
Right.
I've got it's page 71 of this big thick boy here.
No kidding. What does the cover look like? That one? Yeah, okay. I know that series. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, basically the way he describes Genesis 3:15 is he doesn't say that it doesn't say he, which okay, fine. But what he says is that the reason it says he is not because they're describing a man. It's because they're describing the logic of the brain, which the Jewish philosophers would associate as male. And I was like, whoa, really? And so he says it's really meant to be about the woman. I was like, what? I was like,
How
that's just, it blew
interesting.
my mind. I was like,
How
that's crazy.
interesting. Wow.
So to me, that means that
Wow.
she was always the correct definition. And if Jerome had that in his thought process when they were translating the Bible, because Latin would not distinguish the logic of a woman as being male.
Right.
There's no way to do that with Latin.
No.
But if the Hebrew scholars believe that, they would know because that's their pattern of writing.
That's right. How interesting. My goodness. Yeah, translations are really interesting. One translation that's really caught on is the Revised Standard Version Catholic Edition.
Yeah.
And it's pretty good overall. I think there's some problems. One translation, too, that people like, Protestants especially, is the NIV, New International Version. And there are various. One thing that I found in that is there are 13 translations of the word paradosis in the New Testament. Paradosis is the word for tradition. And when in the NIV, whenever the tradition is something negative, like traditions of men, it'll take the word paradosis and translate it as traditions. Whenever it's something positive, like when St. Paul says in 2 Thessalonians 2:15, hold fast to the traditions that you've received. They don't use the word traditions, they use teachings.
Yeah.
It's so tendentious. It's ridiculous. It's just crazy.
The worst one I've seen, they actually replaced tradition in scripture and just put the Bible.
The Bible.
Yeah, it's like at no point in the scriptures would they have said the Bible.
The Bible.
Because it didn't exist when they were writing the scriptures. Like you have to be yeah, I'm just like, okay, come on. That's too on the nose for Protestants. I'm sorry.
That is.
How could you accept that? But there's sola scriptura, so it's like, okay, all right, whatever you say, whatever.
Yeah. So well, there are other topics I could bring up, but I don't want to get off track either. But
that's fine.
I'm just kind of curious what apologists you're acquainted with, but that maybe is a conversation for another time.
Which apologists I enjoy listening to, or
Yeah,
like
which ones you know and which ones you've talked to, like maybe.
I interviewed Joe Heschmeyer actually. That was
Okay.
cool. I really
Good.
like Joe Heschmeyer. I've gotten to talk to him a few times.
Yeah.
He's really awesome. He's a good apologist.
Um,
Kennedy Hall I got to talk to briefly. I really enjoyed
what
him.
about Machuda?
I don't know.
Machuda? No. Okay.
No.
Maybe he teaches like online courses for Catholics, homeschoolers, right?
Oh yeah, I've heard of him then. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's yeah.
Gary Machuda. And then there's well, maybe you know Jimmy Aiken. Jimmy Aiken.
Yeah, I know Jimmy. I know who I haven't met him, but
Mhm.
I definitely know of him. Yeah.
Yeah. He has some really amazing areas where he knows stuff really well. Kind of
He's got
selective.
that very obsessive tendency to dive into things deeper than anybody would think to dive into them. To the
Absolutely. I mean,
to the point where like if you're asking him a question, you're gonna get like a good 10-minute answer.
I know. And he talks in this very unassuming, kind of quiet voice.
Yeah.
He's just very disarming, you know. Uh, but yeah, he became a good friend when I was on my journey into the church. We never met in person. He's kind of a private person, but he lost his wife. She died of cancer, and
Yeah,
yeah,
I listened to his video on that a few years ago now, and
yeah,
I was surprised to hear all that. Like, wow, that's
yeah.
pretty crazy.
And she was praying that he would become a Catholic. You know, he's preparing himself to become a Presbyterian minister, and ended up
Right,
becoming
yeah.
working for Carl Keating out at Catholic Answers. You know, so very interesting.
Yeah, I met the a bunch of people that work for Catholic Answers. I was actually down in Steubenville about July timeframe.
Really?
They were hosting a conference for creators. They do
Oh,
that. They're doing that yearly now. So it's
interesting.
yeah. So they have like a bunch of people out there, and they were kind enough to invite me to come down to that, and that was
Very
pretty cool.
nice. Very nice. Yeah, yeah. That's very good. They're they're quite a university now. You know, quite just growing. I used to go down for conferences to give papers, you know, and so forth, because they'd have personalist conferences on the philosophy of John Paul, or you know, Dietrich von Hildebrand, and so forth. And so I go down, and there's a hotel that I would stay in. That was a motel that was right on the sort of University Drive there, just at the bottom of the campus. And last time I was there was for the retirement conference for John Crosby, who's a philosopher there. And
Okay.
that motel was bought up and turned into a dorm because they had no more room for all the students they were getting.
Yeah,
So I
there's
think,
discussion of them buying up some of the housing too. So we'll see how that
yeah,
goes.
yeah. I mean, just
It's
growing.
Franciscan is a huge Catholic
It's,
like center of just
yeah.
learning and philosophy and theology and everything at this point.
And the same thing is happening out at Benedictine College in Atchison, Kansas, you know. My son teaches out there, and you know, their department, he's in theology, but philosophy and theology have just grown. They've like tripled in size since he started there, you know. Just
Yeah,
amazing.
isn't it? I thought it was Kansas where you had this is kind of a funny anecdote, but isn't that where you had like very charismatic center right next to the SSPX in the same state?
Hmm.
I want to say that's where that happened. Like, because I thought
I'm
Kansas was where they bought the SSPX seminary.
huh.
I thought I could be wrong. Maybe I'm misremembering. I thought that
That the
was something I read.
charismatics have bought
No,
the
they live like they're like down the road from each other. Like you got
oh, interesting.
SSPX
I
and
don't know about
charismatics.
that. Yeah,
I'd
I
have
don't
to
know
look into
about
it
that.
again. It's been a while since I did a deep
I
dive
know
into
there's
it.
a lot of literature that comes out of a place called St. Mary, Kansas, I think, and that
Okay,
must be an SSPX center, I think, something of that sort.
is that
Yeah,
Angelus Press?
yeah, I believe so.
Okay,
I believe so. Yeah,
that would make sense.
yeah,
I just think it would be really funny for those two groups
it would
to
be.
be down the road from each other because they're
Oh,
so antithetical to each other
I know what
in
would
some
happen.
ways.
You know, if they started rubbing shoulders, what would happen? You know.
That would
Yeah.
be
Oh,
interesting.
hilarious, hilarious. Yeah, yeah. So,
Um, oh, here was a question for you. I actually thought of this earlier today.
okay.
Do you think that the foothold that the charismatic movement got into the 1970s, 80s came from some spiritual vacuum coming out of the 60s and 70s? Because I feel like the only way that a movement like that really takes hold is if there's something kind of missing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're onto something there. And the reason is, there, I forget this guy. This guy wrote a book called statistics called something about Catholic indicators or something or other. It's, sort of the rate of marriages within the church, the baptisms, the divorces, the seminary numbers. He sort of tracked all those. I forget the name of this guy, Kenneth something, I think or other. But anyway, and it shows, after Vatican II in the 70s and 80s, there was just, a lot of seminaries were emptied and religious orders collapsed and so forth. And of course, initially, in a lot of the sort of during the sort of excesses of the innovations and so forth, when the altars were being torn out and so forth, there was a desire on the part of some to just go full bore and get rid of the rosary and all these traditional devotions.
I've seen some articles about that. That's kind of wild to me.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's like, who does this, right?
The article said specifically, like, not to have the rosary done at church so it wouldn't scare away Protestants.
Yeah. And I think, when this happened, a lot of this happened in the aftermath of Vatican II. There were a lot of Catholics who just left the church because they said this is too alien. But there were a lot that also stayed. And the ones who stayed, I think, were looking for ways in which to foster their spiritual lives. And they no longer had the 40 hours devotions or the devotion to Our Lady of Perpetual Help or, these traditional things. And along came the charismatic movement in the 60s, right after the council, right? 67 at Duquesne University.
Yeah, pretty much right after.
Right afterwards. And also, we point this out in Volume 4, but during the council, Cardinal Suenens gave a speech in 1963 on the floor of the council, introducing this idea and just hammering it, the idea of the charismatic dimension of the church as opposed to the institutional dimension. And it was ghostwritten by Hans Küng, right?
Okay.
The speech. And it was endorsed by a lot of the sort of leading Nouvelle theologians like Yves Congar and Dalou-Beck and Skellerbecks and so forth, right? Some of these guys kind of went off the deep end at some point. But the thing that's interesting is that right after the council, the charismatic movement just took off, and it was kind of shepherded by Cardinal Suenens, and there's a lot of interesting stuff about that we bring out in Volume 4. But I think the reason that it took off was not only the support it got from Cardinal Suenens in the church, and also Paul VI, although initially quite reluctantly, but because Catholics felt like they were at sea. They were, or maybe a better metaphor would be a desert, right? They just didn't know where to go for spiritual life. And so where they found enthusiasm was in the charismatic movement, the Protestant Pentecostals, right? And so I think you're right about that. I think that's where people turned, because there were people that were sort of on fire with the Holy Spirit, as they said, and they read scripture and they prayed, and were enthusiastic and so forth. So I think you're right about that.
I think it kind of looked more traditional to people that were looking for it at the time. Even if it was new and filled a vacuum or a void of prayer and seriously taking your spirituality.
That's right. So a lot of good people, I think, turned to that, as sort of a sort of refreshing jolt, of energy, new energy.
Yeah.
Of course, Monsignor Ronald Knox also wrote a book called Enthusiasm.
Yeah, nope. I know exactly where you're going with this. Go ahead.
Yeah. And there's a really good dissertation. It's really quite good, by a charismatic named Alan Schreck at Steubenville. He wrote it in Toronto at St. Michael's College in the 70s, I think. He wrote the dissertation. But it's on Monsignor Ronald Knox's book, Enthusiasm, and how it might apply to the Catholic charismatic renewal. So it's a very interesting book.
That is
very interesting. And he's
it wouldn't shock me though, because Ronald Knox was very He talks about how emotions can bring you to the church, but they can't keep you there, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think
Yeah.
that is a lot of what happens with people who are swept up into the charismatic movement. Is they're looking, it's not like the gateway drug. He says it's not really a gateway drug because the Holy Spirit's not a gateway drug,
Right.
but the enthusiasm that you get to with it,
Yeah.
you can't sustain that all the time. It's very hard to.
You can't. That's true. That's true. Yeah. And yeah, Monsignor Ronald Knox. I mean, he there's a section of the book, the 4th volume, where we deal with some of the warnings that charismatics issue about their own movement, both Protestants and Catholics. And these warnings that are issued by the Pentecostals and charismatics themselves are very interesting, right? I can list some of them for you if you're interested. They talk about, they talk about, well, let me just list a few of them. One is
Sounds good.
One is called paraclericalism, right? A tendency more problematic for Catholics than Pentecostals for the laity to assume roles and prerogatives of ordained clergy, right? That's one danger. Another is a neglect of traditional spirituality, a tendency to substitute a spirituality based on charismatic experience for ancient traditions of spirituality. There's a whole lot of heterodox theology of grace in which spirit and grace annihilate or take over nature, whereas in traditional Catholicism, grace perfects nature. One thing that Monsignor Ronald Knox talks a lot about is what he calls ultra-supernaturalism. Right? So supernaturalism is good. It's good to believe in the supernatural, but ultra-supernaturalism can lead to distortions, he says.
Is that where you believe everything is supernatural, essentially?
Yeah, there's a tendency to think, to see something supernatural behind everything that happens, right?
Yeah.
And there's, on the one hand, there's something innocent and something good about the desire to see God's hand in everything. But there's certain things that aren't necessarily supernatural, right?
Right.
And there's also a danger of alienation from the church by those preferring charismatic fellowship over formal institution of worship and catechesis. There's a irrational blind faith in signs from God, a corollary to the belief that grace replaces nature, a tendency to favor theocratic, utopian alternatives over traditional institutions, an obsession with the imminent return of Christ. I believe that Christ could return at any time, but it's, of course, you can.
Yeah, nobody knows the day or the hour, right? That's
right, exactly.
You got to keep that in the back of your mind that any time it could happen.
Yeah, and there's also kind of a Protestant presumption of salvation as opposed to a hope of salvation, and that can be a danger. And these are all things that are mentioned as criticisms by charismatics, which is really interesting, right?
Yeah, you don't often see a movement put out their own danger warning kind of list.
Yeah. So, when people read this in the last volume, I don't want them to think that I'm criticizing the charismatic movement. These are criticisms that come and warnings that come from themselves, Yeah, it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, anytime you involve ups and downs in emotions, you risk having somebody have an overcorrection or an overreaction to something.
Absolutely.
I think that's always a danger with more emotional aspects of spirituality.
Yeah.
Here's another question for you.
Right.
If somebody were to be, this is a little dark, but if somebody were to be possessed by a demon and they started speaking in an older language, would that be a curse of tongues?
A curse of tongues? You could call it that. The Roman ritual, and in the books on exorcism, there's reference to speaking in foreign languages that one has never studied as a sign of demonic possession, right?
Right.
And so this is common. Now, one thing I would say, like charismatics will sometimes say that sometimes in a group of charismatics, there'll be somebody speaking and they don't know what they're saying, but somebody will pipe up and say, well, you were speaking perfect Arabic or something, right? And
Yeah.
I would say in cases like that, I would be a little bit wary, because the only times in which in church history when there was a gift of miraculous tongues where a person spoke a foreign language, they knew what they were saying, right? So if
They
you
knew what they were
don't know what you're
saying,
saying,
and
yeah,
it was the language of somebody in the area that could be evangelized to, right?
right. And so you knew what you were saying, and you were miraculously being heard in the person's native language, or you were speaking their language, right? But you knew what you were saying when you spoke this language. But if you're speaking a language that's a real language, but you don't know what you're saying, okay, first of all, what would be the purpose of that? You don't know what you're saying, right? So could that be from God? Maybe, but I don't know why it would be from God. What would be the purpose of it, right? And so I would be very cautious about getting into sort of areas like that where you think you're speaking some language and you don't know what you're saying, because that's a sign of diabolical tongues, right? It
Yeah.
could be something dangerous.
Well, that was speaking of language you can't understand. I found it somewhat comical that the original Pentecostal missionaries went over to China thinking they could speak Chinese,
Yeah,
and found
yeah,
out very quickly they weren't speaking Chinese.
yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Charles Parham, the guy who founded the Bible school in Topeka and led the students to begin the Pentecostal movement there in 1900, on New Year's Eve, I think it was. He began to advertise. He would talk to people in the press, like the Topeka News or Times or something, and he would say, pretty soon we're going to have missionaries come here and learn to speak in tongues miraculously. They'll never have to study language ever again, because it will just come miraculously, right? And he would say things like, if God could take Balaam's ass, his mule, and have him
The
speak in
donkey, yeah. Or, yeah.
yeah, perfect Arabic or whatever language it was. It wouldn't have been Arabic. He used the word Arabic, but to speak in Aramaic or something, he can take your mouth and make you speak in foreign languages. But of course, they couldn't speak in foreign languages. And it was very embarrassing, right? They tried to, but they were just babbling. And so then the result was that they redefined tongues to be a language of the Spirit, only intelligible to those who interpret in the Spirit and so forth. And that led to a private language of prayer and praise. One thing a Austrian philosopher says, Ludwig Wittgenstein, he says the idea of a private personal language is a contradiction in terms, because a language is to communicate.
Mm-hmm.
If your language can't be understood, it's not a language, right?
Yeah. As so eloquently put by one of our commenters, boom shalalala, boom shalalala.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Anyway, so here's the next. I got a different question for you, since
Okay.
we've. By the
Yeah.
way, if anybody wants to find these books, I'm gonna put a pin a comment. I already put it in earlier with the screen, but I'm gonna pin a comment to this video that has links to the books on. As Amazon the best place to get them, would you say, or would you say the publisher's website? Or
Amazon is the easiest. You can also get Kindle versions that are cheaper, but also the publisher, Whip and Stock, they occasionally run a sale and they're really good. So I would check Whip and Stock too. That's WIPF, and Stock, STOCK. They often have sales that are good, but Amazon would be the
so I'll make
easiest.
sure to.
Yeah.
I'll make sure to pin both. Then we'll put the Amazon link to the volumes and the publisher's website on there too. That way, if anybody's interested in what we've been chatting about, they can find it. I am very much looking forward to. I'm probably on the top of that list of people looking forward to volumes 3 and 4. I very much enjoyed volumes 1 and 2. But a side note, is there any recommendations you would give to people who are interested in becoming going to the seminary and becoming a priest? Is it like you've spent a lot of time there? Is there anything that you would say they should like consider before or during their discernment period, becoming a priest and all that?
Well, one thing that the Vatican has now instituted for seminarians is what's called a propedeutic year. So before they start their seminary courses, they have a year of basically spiritual leading and spiritual formation, and it's very, very good. It helps to kind of screen seminarians, but it also helps the seminarians themselves to discern if this is God's will for them. And so it's very, very good. So spiritual reading is good, and also just to become a reader, period, because so many people don't read anymore.
Yeah.
And I would say read broadly. Don't just confine yourself to nonfiction. Read also a good novel. I mean, the greatest Catholic novelist of the 20th century, I think, was Evelyn Waugh in Britain. He was just a terrific writer. He converted in 1930. He wrote Brideshead Revisited, which is a well-known novel.
Yeah.
He wrote Sword of Honor. He wrote a number of books. Just a terrific writer. Another one is Walker Percy, who's a little funny, but he's also very clever and very dialectical. He kind of hooks you in and makes you think about things. Just read broadly, like you yourself are doing. Just read a lot. It's really helpful. There's a book by Certain Lang. It's a French name, but if you looked up on Amazon, you looked up The Intellectual Life. It's a really good book about what I would like to see every seminarian cultivate, and that is a life of the intellect, a life of the mind. It's a very good book about how to develop habits of the mind, right? The Intellectual Life, it's called. That doesn't mean you have to become a blooming intellectual or something, but it's important to be able to think about the nature of reality in a clear, reflective, and discerning way, so that you can preach well, right? So you can preach in a way that's compelling, because you understand the nature of reality. And a lot of writings by a popular writer like Peter Kraft can be very helpful too. Peter Kraft has written on all sorts of subjects. He likes to write dialogues, but there's one called A Refutation of Moral Relativism, which sounds like a really serious, difficult book, but it's hilariously funny.
Relativism is a huge problem. I have not read that one, but it's on my list. I've got a massive list of books I'm planning to read. It's very long, but so that's on there.
In that book, he has he puts into the mouth of a Muslim named Isa, which is an Arabic name for Jesus.
Okay.
But it's a Muslim named Jesus, is the absolutist. And the person who represents relativism is this extremely liberal African-American woman named Libby.
Okay.
And the conversations are hilarious, but they're very edifying. You learn a lot by reading these conversations. It's just very interesting. So Peter Kraft, I recommend.
What about Chesterton with the ball and the cross?
Oh, absolutely. Chesterton is such a gold mine, as well as Hilaire Belloc. Oh my gosh, so many good books. Chesterton and Belloc can hold down a whole era, but they're just wonderful. Like for Chesterton, I would recommend also the book. What is it? The Everlasting Man is a good book.
Yeah.
Kind of get a good view of history, and he writes so playfully and so interestingly.
Probably the strangest one I read by Chesterton was the Man Who Was Thursday.
How was that?
It's a strange one. It ends in kind of a dream sequence.
Really?
It's just kind of bizarre, because it seems like it's ending like a lot of his other fiction, where you end up with kind of apocalyptic Jesus type language and stuff. But this one, it goes beyond that and into Revelation, and then he wakes up essentially. It's very out there.
Wow. I tried to read it, but I just couldn't get into it. It's too weird.
The easiest way to get through a book when I have a hard time is audiobooks.
Audiobooks, okay.
So if I can kind of tune in and out as I am interested and not interested, audiobooks are the way to go.
So you have a subscription then to audiobooks?
No, I usually buy them a la carte, whatever I'm feeling that weekend, because Audible will let you buy them even if you don't have a subscription.
I see. Okay. That makes sense. Then there's LibriVox, which is free, but again, the readers are not necessarily very good sometimes.
Yeah, it really depends on what you're reading and
Yeah,
who's doing the audio for it. Because
yeah,
as
yeah.
somebody who used to do music and now podcasting and everything else, I'm
Right.
very particular about the stuff I listen to.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah. I can
if I
see that.
see if I see a narrator I like, or like, I mean, kind of similar to if you really like a translator's work, you'll kind of
Right.
stick with that translator for other works.
Exactly.
For audible narration, like if it's a good narrator, I will happily pay a few extra bucks to get his version again in the future.
Absolutely.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. I have this friend who listens to Charles Dickens, and there's only one reader that he'll listen to named Preble. He's an Englishman with an English accent. Just loves him. So anyway, yeah, yeah. So
I accidentally
yeah.
stumbled onto probably the best 99-cent audiobook I've ever found on Audible. It's like this very independent English guy who does kind of David Bowie style music for the preludes in the book. It's wild. But it's
Really?
it's a book by George MacDonald, Fantasties.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
So all the interludes are like this, like very ambient David Bowie guitar-y sound. And the guy's
Wow.
got a voice too. I'm so
Really?
impressed. And it was 99 cents.
Wow, that's amazing. And MacDonald influenced C.S. Lewis a lot, right?
Yeah. And
Yeah,
Tolkien to a degree as
and
well.
Tolkien too. Yeah. Oh, the
Initially
Inklings.
Tolkien admitted to it and then he didn't. He like retracted it later and said, "No, I wasn't really influenced by that."
Yeah. You know, if you ever get to Oxford, you got to go to the Eagle and the Child. You know, you can see where these guys all sat and held forth. You know, just wonderful.
A friend of mine did that years ago, actually.
Really.
But what was funny was when he was there, uh, he was having his burger and beer, and he looked over, and there was some of the cast from the Chronicles of Narnia movie.
Oh my gosh,
He was like,
really?
yeah, he was like right next. He's like sitting in the C.S. Lewis and Tolkien booth, looks over, and there's the actress that played
Oh my
Susan.
gosh. Oh my gosh. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. But you know,
So
that team of people, I mean, it included older people like Charles Williams, you know, who wrote some really interesting kind of Catholic occult fiction. Really weird. But then Owen Barfield, really interesting writer, fascinating stuff. And this whole idea of romantic literature, you know, romantic Catholic or Christian literature, really interesting stuff. Interesting stuff. Yeah.
I really like historical fiction. You know, if I'm not reading something that's well developed, or like the Tolkien universe has got its own thing going, I really do like historical fiction because I learn while I'm reading, which is
Yes.
cool.
Right.
One of the trilogies I read in the past few years was actually by, I'm sure you've heard of Taylor Marshall.
Yes.
He wrote the St. George and the Dragon trilogy. It was
How are
actually
those?
really good. I really
They're
liked
good?
it. I really
Really?
liked it. It's
He's been
written at kind of
advertising.
a it's written at kind of a young adult level,
Okay.
but it's still
But
very
very good.
good. Yeah.
He's been advertising his latest book. I forget what it's called, but just out apparently. So,
Yeah, I was actually on the launch team for that, believe it or not. So
really?
if you pick
Oh,
up the hardcover, my name's in there somewhere.
no kidding. Cool.
Yeah, that
Very
was pretty
cool.
cool.
Have you
But
read something? There's a book my daughter read recently called Toward the Gleam. Have you read that?
no, I haven't. What's
It's
that one about?
apparently it's fiction. It's but it deals with the life of Tolkien apparently.
Okay.
So there's clearly somebody who's a Tolkien character in there, but it's supposed to be a very well written book. I haven't read it, but my daughter swears by it. Says it's really good.
I'm gonna check that out.
Yeah, Toward
Um,
the Gleam. I don't know
here's
the
an
authors.
interesting theory that I've put together over the years,
Okay.
and it's been somewhat confirmed from what I can tell, that when Tolkien wrote Lord of the Rings, because
Uh-huh.
Ransom, obviously Dr. Ransom in the Space Trilogy is meant to be Tolkien. It's a representation of him
Oh, really? I
because
hadn't
he's a
heard that.
philologist.
Oh.
But in Lord of the Rings, Tolkien, whether by purpose or by accident, wrote C.S. Lewis into his book as Treebeard.
Oh, that is too rich. So Treebeard is Lewis.
I mean, there's a lot that
Oh,
goes into that because Treebeard does a lot of things that Lewis does. Whether again, it could have been a subconscious thing, but a
okay.
lot of what the way Tolkien writes Treebeard
Uh-huh.
mirrors things that C.S. Lewis did in his life.
Like what? Like what?
Well, like,
Is it?
so for example, the Ents, right? What do? They go and they take down Saruman, and they what is it? What is that area called again? My brain is not.
Isengard.
Isengard. They
Yeah,
take
yeah,
Isengard, right? So
yeah. Right.
they're almost there, right? And
Okay.
then they could have helped to finish the fight. They could have,
Right.
go full convert, but no, they go back to the forest. Well, C.S. Lewis,
Oh,
reluctant convert,
beautiful.
becomes
Oh,
Anglican but not Catholic.
oh, that's beautiful. I never thought of that. That's fascinating. Oh my gosh, that's great. Wow.
But yeah, he's late. He's eventually convinced to join the fight, but
Yeah.
not all the way through.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, there have been a number of books written about Lewis and why he didn't convert. One by Christopher Derrick, another by Joseph Pierce, I think. There may be one more even, but they all kind of conclude it was kind of a cultural thing, you know?
It was, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is kind of the same thing with the Ents. But he leaves
Yeah,
it open
yeah,
because the Ents, they don't go away, but
yeah,
they also don't finish the fight. So it's,
right.
it's left open. And I think that was the point, right? It was like,
Right.
but like I said, it could be subconscious. A lot of what CS, because Tolkien says, obviously it's a Catholic work by the nature of the fact that I'm Catholic,
Right.
but not
right.
because I purposefully wrote it to be a Catholic work.
Right.
So I think a lot of what he writes into his books is subconsciously there, but not necessarily entirely on purpose.
You know, there's a, I'm trying to remember, I think it was, I'm not sure. Yeah, anyway, there's one, I think it was Walker Percy actually in a book on his conversion. He converted from Presbyterianism to Catholicism. He became an oblate and so forth late in life. But in one of his conversion storybooks, I'm pretty sure it was he who said that it was C.S. Lewis who, like Moses, led all these people into the promised land of Catholicism, but himself never made it over the water, into the promised land.
that definitely, yeah, that makes sense. That tracks.
Yeah. Oh my goodness! Wow. I envy the life of Joseph Pierce because he holds down this whole era where he can just feast on all this fantastic literature produced by the period of Chester Belloc and all these writers like Waugh and even Oscar Wilde, and they're all of this one generation basically. Just really interesting. Like in his book Literary Converts, just fascinating stuff. Yeah, wow. But that connection to Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, I never thought of that. Is that in print anywhere?
The Treebeard thing?
Yeah.
I found it in like some obscure website. I can't prove that it's real.
Okay. A website somewhere. Okay.
Yeah. I'd have to go digging for it again. But the more I look into it, the more it seems to be legitimate. And in fact, I think there was some radio interview that was referenced where he said alluded to it.
Huh.
But the C.S. Lewis, Dr. Ransom is Tolkien. That's fact. People are it's a philologist. He does things that Tolkien does. It's very clearly Tolkien. And I think C.S. Lewis even says that he wrote it for his dear friend. In like one of the forewords, he says, I write it for my dear friend Tolkien.
I'm going to have to reread that Space Trilogy by C.S. Lewis again, just to get Ransom down, Oh my gosh. The hideous strength.
I mean, clearly C.S. Lewis held him in such high regard.
Of course. They loved each other, obviously. Yeah.
I'm trying to think if there's any other questions I had for you because we're coming up on that end point where we were talking about calling it.
But I tell you,
did you have any questions for me?
Oh, a lot, but they would require, maybe a few beers in a pub somewhere,
I'm down for that sometime. We're not that far apart.
I mean, it's just been fascinating for me to learn about you and your background and people you've met and whatnot. Just really interesting. You'll have to come to the seminary sometime. We can have lunch there or go out to lunch. That'd be fun to do. Yeah,
I'm absolutely will accept that invitation. Got to find a good time to do it.
Send me your email and let's do that sometime.
Yeah.
You have my email, right?
Yeah. We've been corresponding with it.
Oh yeah.
Otherwise, I don't think you couldn't have come on here.
No, that's right. I'm not thinking. Yeah, but I'll email you and we can do something. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Terrific.
Any
Yeah.
last words then for the podcast tonight?
No, I don't think so. I've already done my Latin breviary prayers for the evening, so I'm done with that. It's been good talking with you, and I hope your readers, your listeners enjoy whatever we said.
Well, I think I would love to have you come back on for philosophy in the future.
That'd be fun. Yeah. I've done a lot in the area of phenomenology, as well as in St. Thomas Aquinas, but and we can talk about that sometime.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, on that note, I am going to conclude the podcast.
Okay.
And if you hang on for a minute, we can chat for like 2 or 3 minutes before you take off. So, all right.
Yeah.
For everybody else, I'll see you guys on the other
God
side next week.